Hello there, folks, and welcome to season 2 of Trek Tonight. As always, I have my good buddies Leo Bernjanisek and Joe Townsell here with us, and we are
Season
going to
one or
be
two.
we are eagerly awaiting the launch of Picard season 3, as many of you I'm sure are, but we got to wait. We've got like about a month or so. And so we decided, we've talked a little bit about this, but we decided we are going to look, and so I'm back in uniform, we are going to look at the TOS episodes that, in our opinion, were most influential on future Trek that came after them. Some of these may be slam dunks, kind of obvious. I think tonight's is a little bit obvious, but some of them might be a little controversial. So we'll see. Might be kind of fun. But tonight we're going to look at Space Seed.
Yes.
And how are you guys doing? Before we jump into that, how's everybody doing?
I
Jesse,
grow
good to meet you.
fatigued.
What's that?
I grow fatigued.
Yes. Hang on a second. Are you bringing me tissues?
Well, how nice.
No, I guess not.
And I'm doing well too. I'm just wrapping up a great visit in Fresno with my good friends here, and heading back to the shuttlecraft in Kingman tomorrow.
Right. Right. Honey,
Tiny
you
alien on
gotta
the
wait,
bridge.
baby. Yeah, and hopefully you'll have an easy time flying home.
Yeah.
I've got my fingers crossed that all of that's kind of resolved. So
Yeah, we'll do the quadruples, you know,
yeah,
along with the Vulcan salute.
there you go.
I think I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah, I don't want to. There you go. I'm afraid to try. So, anyway, anything else going on? Yeah, I heard some crazy things in the news this morning. I heard there's a mother and daughter who were the owners of a crematorium, and oh, my stagehand. Thank you very much, sweetie. We'll see you at the end of the show. At any rate, they owned this crematorium business. I don't know where it was. I've forgotten. But they finally got arrested because they were illegally selling the body parts of deceased people and not telling the families, and then just giving them whatever ashes they gave them to fill the jar.
That's
That's terrible.
creepy. And I have a little Star Trek news. There is a podcast called the Duras Sisters.
Oh yes. Tell us about
who
this.
are do a very fun podcast, Star Trek related. And I follow them on Twitter, and they follow me on my Trek Haiku.
Right.
And they were saying, "Hey, does anybody want a Christmas card?" And since tomorrow is Epiphany, the official end of Christmas.
That's right.
And they sent me this lovely card with pictures of them on it. So please check out the Duras Sisters on whatever platform you get your podcasts from.
Mm-hmm.
They have a nice library out there, and I would advise anybody who loves Star Trek to check it out. So
Now, when you say a nice library, what does that mean?
I don't have the exact count, but it's not like they have 3 episodes.
I see. So they're prolific.
Yeah, they're prolific.
Right.
They've been doing it for a while.
What type of things do they cover, Leo?
Well, they were the last one they did. They were doing a series of it was around Halloween. They were doing these sort of spooky themed Star Trek ones.
Oh, cool.
And they were talking about the Borg and like other, the idea that there's sort of the horror elements of Star Trek, of which there are some, not a ton, but there are some.
Right.
So I would say, there've been a number of sort of horror-based episodes of Star Trek, so they were exploring that, but they tend to do it on theme. They choose a theme and do a number of episodes on that.
Nice.
So,
hey, Scott Taylor gave us a thumbs up.
Thank you, Scott.
Good to see you again. And I'm going to hop over to the comments because our good buddy Keith is here saying good evening.
Thank you, Keith.
And then he gives us an obligatory
yes,
which is marvelous. I was watching another podcast today, and I think it's a guy who's like big at sci-fi. I sort of stumbled across him. The video podcast. I'm gonna say this, and you're probably all gonna go, "Oh yeah, that guy." Sci-Fi Wire, I think it's the name.
Oh
of it.
yeah, I've heard of that site. Sure.
Very amusing guy, very funny. But he did this bit about how he likes to walk around his home and then periodically turn around and say, "This is SETI Alpha 5." I thought it was a funny bit.
Yes.
But anyway, so let's see. Anything else before we jump into this?
Well, I'll give credit to my friend Tony, who I'm visiting. He we were talking about the Tonight Show a little earlier, and he said authorized me to share a couple of jokes. He just said, "Welcome to SETI Alpha 5."
Ah, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Well, that's something that this other guy said, which was that perhaps maybe if Kirk had dropped him off at Fantasy Island, things might have been worked out.
Yeah.
Things might turn a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Welcome to SETI Alpha.
All right, so we are talking about Space Seed. One of the few notes I do not have is, I know it's season 1. I don't recall which episode number it was. And
It was towards the end of it was in the back half, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to say 16 or 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and do we have a director and a writer for this?
I don't know the director, but I believe it was written by Gene L. Kuhn, who
and Roddenberry.
Yeah.
And
we'll
it did come from a concept. I think the guy's name was Chris Willis. If anybody knows, Keith says, "Oh yeah, that guy." I think his name was Chris Willis, but he came up with the idea, which basically was the plot of Space Seed, except that they really were prisoners being transported like they would be, like they were when they were being the British were sending people to
Australia. Yeah.
And he also, a couple of other changes that they said, no, it's got to be, we can't have that. Was MacGyver's was working as a communications officer as opposed to being a historian.
Right.
And that there was a scene with her and Yeoman Rand, where Rand's sort of giving her the business about the fact that she finds this guy cute. And they had to cut that because Rand was off the show by that point.
Right.
And they didn't want Nichelle Nichols' slot to be truncated in any way. So they put her into a different role. And I think it was a good idea to put her in as a historian. But I'd like to share something with you. This comes to us from our good friends over at StarTrek.com, a wonderful website, official Paramount website. And this will give you, anybody who I can't imagine watching the show hasn't seen Space Seed, but if you haven't, take a look at this.
Definitely a space vessel of some type. Origin? The mid-1990s was the era of your last so-called World War. The Eugenics Wars. Your attempt to improve the race through selective breeding.
Is it possible they're still alive?
A man from the 20th century coming alive.
His heart valve action is twice the power of yours and mine. An improved breed of human. That's what the Eugenics War was all about. By my estimate, there was some 80 or 90 of these young supermen unaccounted for.
We offered the world order. Khan Noonien Singh.
From 1992 through 1996, absolute ruler of more than a quarter of your world. The last of the tyrants to be overthrown.
Captain, security here. Khan's escaped.
Your ship is mine.
Your captain will die.
My vessel was useless. I need you and yours to select a colony planet, one with a population willing to be led by us.
I declare all charges and specifications in this matter have been dropped. Can you tame a world?
Have you ever read Milton, Captain?
statement Lucifer made when he fell into the pit. It is better to rule in hell than serve in heaven.
It would be interesting, Captain, to return to that world in 100 years and learn what crop had sprung from the seed you planted today.
Yes, Mr. Spock. It would indeed.
Yes.
Well, they didn't have to wait 100, more like 15.
Yeah.
Yeah. At any rate, I thought that was a wonderful way of summing up all the bullet points that are
It was.
in Space Seed. They haven't seemed to produce any more, so I would encourage them to do more because I think they are a great way to quickly look at something at an episode of Star Trek and say, yeah, here's all the cliff notes you need. But at any rate, so yeah, we picked Space Seed. Now all of us, I think, we also sort of took a internal poll, and we all threw out episodes, and Space Seed ended up being on a lot of our individual lists. So, Leo, I'm going to jump in with you because I know you and I had several that were on the same.
Yes.
Page. So why did you pick Space Seed?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, it spawned both the most popular Star Trek movie ever made, Wrath of Khan,
right,
and perhaps one of the most maligned, whether that is justified or unjustified, Star Trek movies, Into Darkness, which was sort of the reboot of Wrath of Khan, which doesn't have the same impact because it doesn't have the history of it. But it's interesting because you and I went to see a preview of Wrath of Khan.
We did,
when we were like 18 years old.
Yeah,
stood online for like 4 hours because it was supposed to be an 8:00 show, and that filled up, and the line was all the way around the block.
Yep,
long crosstown blocks in New York City, and they decided to do another 10:00 show because there were so many people.
Right.
And we got in to see it, and it was. I have to say, while Space Seed was never I was never disappointed if Space Seed came up on the rotation on WPIX, where we watched Star Trek as in our youth. It's a solid episode. But I don't think before Wrath of Khan, I don't think it was necessarily anybody's top 10 or top 5 lists.
Right. Well, and I have some interesting information about how that all came about because Harvey Bennett was now. I want to jump in here because Keith was getting trouble getting some of his comments through. He said, telling us that it was episode 22.
Right.
It was directed by Mark Daniels, and the guy that I'm thinking of was Kerry Wilbur, not Twitch Willis. So I was sort of in the neighborhood there. And then he's telling us that Twitch doesn't like Gene's last name and keeps refusing to send the message when it's included. Man, is there somebody over there that's not a Roddenberry fan?
Yeah, I don't know.
At any rate, so Harvey Bennett was brought in because he was a successful television director and had also had some success on theatrical releases, and Paramount wanted to do another motion picture for Star Trek, but they were not really happy with the end result of the first film. So he came in, and the first thing off, he had never watched Star Trek. So he sat down and watched all of the episodes. And then he came to it and he said, well, the real problem you had with the first film was you didn't have a villain.
Right.
And this guy Khan is a fantastic villain. And so that's where it came about, as that's what the film would be about. And in my opinion, you touched on two reasons, Leo. But in my opinion, it saved the Star Trek franchise being a motion picture.
Oh, I entirely agree.
And so as a result of that, let's forget about the fact that there's 4 or 5 series that I have in my list that had elements from Space Seed.
Right.
And just talk about the fact that we might not all be sitting here talking about Star Trek the way we are.
No.
If it wasn't for the Wrath of Khan.
I agree. Also, just one other thing is this was in terms of world building. And we have to remember that Star Trek world building happened episode by episode. I'm sure Gene had notes and so on, but the idea of this was the first introduction of the Third World War, aka the Eugenics War,
Right.
Of the 90s.
And I remember that was terrible.
Yeah,
I mean, what a time to live through.
But, well, we all made it through somehow.
We did. We did. Yeah.
So, but that was an important part of it. Became a very important part of Star Trek lore.
Right.
And it was something that was just introduced. It was never until the Wrath of Khan came up. The eugenics war had no other influence.
Right.
Like, it never came up in another episode, I should say.
Right. So what about you, Joe? What are your thoughts about Space Seed and how it fits into this?
Well, in terms of
category?
Sure. And in terms of being highly influential, I mean, as you both have touched upon, I mean, look at what it spawned and what it meant to the franchise across the board.
Right.
Sometimes to the point of absurdity. Granted, Into Darkness, and most notably, most recently, the season ender, I believe, of Picard season 2, where we have Project Khan, which is like, what is that about?
Yeah.
But as far as all the stuff, I know you're going to touch on, Chris, as far as what it begat, and it continues. I mean, rumors persist, and I hope they're true rumors, that Nicholas Meyer, who directed Wrath of Khan, is going to write and possibly direct a Khan miniseries for Paramount Plus. I hope it happens. I can't wait for that.
They are doing it. It's going to be a podcast, actually.
Oh, is that how
it's going to be audio drama?
Yeah, I'd heard that. And it's neat because one of the first impacts that I had on my list was the novel To Reign in Hell, which is the story both of the eugenics war and then his time on Ceti Alpha 5, I believe. I've never read it.
I know if it was out the one, but I know they had a couple of novels to document that period in time, and they try to offer explanations to why it supposed took place in the 90s when it actually didn't. But then again,
right,
Picard seems to have gone back to the established canon on that. So
it's one of those things where the 90s seemed far enough in the future that they could say, oh, there was this terrible war in the 1990s and we're in the late 60s. So it seems like a reasonable amount until the 90s happen and pass. So,
well, the other thing that's great is that back in 2018, I think, is when we stopped having to have cryogenic transport because we were able to get from planet to planet very easily. So Scotty reminds us about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank God we just wrapped up 2022, which of course is the year of Soylent Green. We don't want that to
happen. By the way, this is the year of Zardoz, so everybody get your bright orange diaper ready.
Yeah, I can't wait. I think we all three look fabulous in that outfit.
Yes. Special Zardoz episode.
Yeah.
I talk about future impacts. What's interesting is the eugenics war, the idea of genetic manipulation being illegal in the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems very specifically an Earth prejudice, which is ironic because Earth in Star Trek, it's usually, the idea that Earth was like, well, Kirk would be like, well, we used to have these prejudices, but we moved beyond them, and Picard would do that sort of thing.
Right.
The idea that the humans were like a little more open-minded sometimes than the aliens around them.
Right.
But the next time it shows up is in an episode called Dr. Bashir, I presume, season 5, episode 16 in Deep Space Nine, where it's discovered that Julian Bashir was genetically enhanced by, at his parents' request when he was 6 years old.
Right.
And this has been the deep, dark secret he's been holding, keeping his whole life.
Right.
Which explains.
And then you find out about that other little gaggle of mental.
Yeah, and there's later episode. I don't remember the name of that episode, but there was like about 5 other enhanced individuals who are all geniuses, but are much less socially. They're not as socially well adjusted as Julian is.
Let me jump in and just throw this out because I saw this listed as related to genetic engineering, and it jumps in before your
Okay.
DS9 thing, and that is Infinite Spock in the animated series.
Oh,
Well, that's a deep cut. I have not seen what there was. I know
I think he's also. I think that's also a genetic enhancement or genetic.
there
metal.
was some genetic. I mean, he made that clone of Spock, and
Right.
it was giant. And whose
Yeah.
skeleton shows up later on in
In
Lower
the
Decks.
collector. Yeah, on Lower Decks, which I loved.
It might be.
love that.
I would have to go back
Still
to
in
watch.
the tunic. Still in the giant tunic.
Still in the tunic.
Sort of
It's his
tattered and
bones.
draped over the skeleton. Yeah.
Yes. But
yes, we shouldn't give short shift to gigantic Spock.
yes. Well, let's I'll pour a little Romulan ale on the curb for giant Spock clone.
There you go.
But at the end of that Deep Space Nine episode, his father takes the hit for him. He says, "I'll go to jail."
Right.
And he keeps his commission and can continue to practice medicine. Two things he would not have been able to do.
Right.
And the JAG admiral says, he says, "Listen, for every Julian Bashir, there could be another Khan waiting to happen."
Mhm.
So their prejudices are still prejudices. Their preconceived notions of genetic manipulation are still deeply seated within human, the human mindset.
Well, sure. I mean, let's think about it. Nobody wears a Chaplin mustache, right?
No,
Yeah.
that is true.
So,
well,
I am hoping that coming off of Prodigy, that the doll character will give us maybe a little bit of
yes, I mean
on
it goes on.
resolving those issues.
That's sort of where it ends is with Doll is, and apparently he was a product of noon devotees. The next thing that showed up in my research was augments. It was in Enterprise. There was a 3-episode arc, the Augment Crisis, Borderlands, Cold Station 12, and the Augments.
Right.
And Eric Soon, played by Brent Spiner, perhaps the most notorious family in all of Star Trek history, did some genetic manipulation. And the Augments, of course, are they were prone towards aggression, and he's kind of like horrified, and the Enterprise crew barely is able to stop it. So that was another, it keeps, even though it takes place chronologically earlier than Space Seed, it is another example of this bit of history rearing its head.
Sure. Well, and then we jump to Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
Where we have the character of number 1 who's augmented.
She's an Illyrian. It's a species that does augmentation as a matter of course.
Right.
And, as a result, they can't join the Federation because of these,
right.
Perhaps understandable prejudices, but, prejudices nevertheless.
Yeah.
There's also just another little thing. There's Affliction and Divergence, which were 2 episodes later in Enterprise, which was an attempt to justify the smooth-faced Klingons. There was if you remember, there was some terrible pandemic happening in the Klingon worlds, and they used, because they had some augments, because the augments stole a Klingon bird of prey, and there was still some genetic material left over on the ship, and the Klingons were using it to try to cure the plague, but it gave them the smooth-faced Klingons, which is sort of an explanation as to why in the original series they didn't have ridges. But again, repercussions with repercussions. Yeah. And then we get to Strange New Worlds and Commander Una Chin Riley, who we saw unceremoniously arrested at the end of episode 10 in this season finale. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, because whether they're going to make an exception for her, because they made an exception for Julian, but that's what 100 or 150 years later,
right?
So it's
yeah. I mean, that's interesting, because let's think about this. Julian knew, and he kept it from the Federation of Starfleet.
Yeah.
So how much different is that from what number one did?
It isn't, except that she doesn't have somebody take the fall for her. Like it's also he didn't have a choice as a child to have this happen to him, and her people just can adapt. They are augmented to adapt to different environments and circumstances quickly.
Well, one could argue she didn't have a choice either.
Well, that's true.
It would have had to have been done at birth for her as well.
Well, the thing is, I mean, one thing that Star Trek has shown us is that number one, the Federation can have some really unusual rules for an otherwise enlightened body, because don't go to Talos 4, you're going to kill you. That's punishable by death.
Right.
And this, I'm going to stick to my theory for now that number one will be given a pass only if she joins Section 31 for that upcoming spinoff.
Well, I mean, I do think that they do have to come up with a reason that we didn't see number one ever again, really, except that there were a couple of comics I think she was in. But so they do have to have a reason to get her off the Enterprise at some point. I'm just hoping we get another season out of her because I really like the actress quite a bit.
Me too. Yeah.
I do. I don't think I have not read anything about her not coming back.
Right. I think we'll see something with her. I would imagine. But
I
mean, it would illustrate I'm sorry, Leo. It would illustrate a kind of a believable, natural progression of how they handle an augment through Federation history, from number one to Bashir and then to Dahl.
Right. Yeah, so they probably won't handle her that well, to be honest with you.
It's entirely possible. Well, I mean, again, because Pike knew, and he was basically going to be like, "Listen, let me worry about it."
Yeah, you know what, Keith? I bet you somebody over at Twitch is an augment, and that's why they don't want Gene Roddenberry's name coming up.
I think it's a brilliant deduction, Chris.
I think that may be the case.
I think that's as plausible as anything else.
Yeah. So there must be a song running around somewhere in the year 2023.
And talking a little bit about Picard. Now we saw it was at the end, and I have to admit I kind of rolled my eyes when they said Project Khan, because it's just like, wink, just make sure that people get it. It was too obvious an Easter egg. He was not Roddenberry, yes. Is the if it said like eugenics program, I think the fans would have gotten it right away.
Sure.
But when you call it Khan, it also that implies like Khan is like the prototype, and he clearly is not, because he ruled more than a quarter of the world,
Right.
And was as I think McCoy said, he was the best of a bad lot.
Right.
But I have an interesting, here's sort of a hot take, and I was thinking about this. I rewatched Space Seed. How good a tactician is Khan? Because I sometimes think he's a guy who's always playing the short game. Like he doesn't it takes in space, he attempts to take over the Enterprise. He seduces MacGyver. Also, he seems like he'd be a bad boyfriend / husband, because he's definitely doing all sorts of mind games with him.
Okay. Well, first of all, that whole scene where I think it's supposed to be a seduction scene.
Yeah.
But that whole scene between him and MacGyver's where he forces her onto her knees.
Yeah.
Really cringy.
Yeah.
Okay, number one. But number two, classic Dom submissive BDSM
absolutely,
thing going on there. I mean, just classic for that. So, that's he's got a very strange thing with women.
Now he's been awakened in the 23rd century. He's trying to, he's learning about stuff, but he hasn't learned everything about the 20th century. And he just takes a look at the crew of the Enterprise, dismisses them as sort of like less than, and attempts to take over the ship, because he's like, well, I'm gonna get right back to, taken over the universe,
Right.
and thank you very much. So
we had a world to win. Now we have a, what does it say,
yes,
galaxy or universe?
so he basically, tries to, he through intimidation tries to force the crew to like submit to his will, and they're not having any of it because they're professionals.
Right.
And had he just waited till they got to that starbase, and what gonna let them wake up the rest of his guys, although it's possible they might not have, but it just feels like he could not get out of his own way. He could not,
Right.
like, his ego was such that he was like, I should be able to I'll be running this place within a week.
Yeah.
And then
well, even in the first few minutes of being fully conscious,
yeah,
and he's talking to Kirk, and you can just see his whole attitude is like he's talking to a plebe.
yeah,
like, I mean, he's just like humoring him in a way, but and it is astonishing to imagine that a man from the 20th century could take a few hours reading through Starfleet technical manuals and understand the entire the tricks of the working of the Enterprise. Like, not just how to run it, like not just how to put in coordinates and set the helm and all that, but to understand how to turn off systems and
well, he did have
5 areas of oxygen, and I mean, it's a lot of tricky.
He did have MacGyvers to help him out.
Yeah, but she's a historian, and not a
but
particularly
she's still.
good
I mean, she's like
officer.
she has basic Starfleet, competency. She's probably, she's not Scotty, but she's like.
But let's look at MacGyvers for a minute. I mean, she's not a particularly good Starfleet officer, and
No.
I used to sit there and think that Kirk was being a hard ass. When you first hear him ask for it, he goes, well, let's give that historian something to do. And he doesn't even really remember her name.
Yeah.
And then later on, he ends up having to chew her out because she's Google-eyeing all over Khan.
Yeah.
And he's kind of got a point.
Yeah.
Like, she looks like she just sits in her little room and paints pictures of famous dead tyrants.
Well,
yeah.
You got to acknowledge though that she just had a thing for that rich Corinthian leather.
Yeah. You can't argue with a rich Corinthian leather.
No, you can't. You can't. What car was that?
Cordoba.
The Cordoba.
The Cordoba.
Why do I know this?
That's right. No, hey, listen, it was on the tip of my tongue.
It was it's a blast.
But as far as Khan being able to adapt so easily and quickly, but there were limits, and one of the more intriguing aspects of Wrath of Khan was when they went into the Mutara Nebula, and Spock indicates he's effective and he's cunning, but he has 2-dimensional thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because why? So having to adapt the way he thinks didn't come as quickly.
No.
And that makes sense because he wouldn't have had any real reason to have 3-dimensional strategic thinking that way.
No,
exactly.
Really. So.
I always wondered why, as a quick aside, why 2 ships are always on the same plane. How come one isn't like this?
That's our friend of the show and occasional guest Craig Lubin, has talked about how much that irritates him.
Oh, is that right?
Because it's true. Because it's not like space isn't like a highway where everybody's on the same level. Everybody's sort of basically like, even if they're slightly on different levels, they're not. It's not like one is like this and one is
they kind of should be.
Yeah,
so they're all approaching that same point from a different trajectory.
Yeah,
I always thought of it. I have to give with Craig and get his thoughts directly, but I always thought it'd be a good plot point that for one ship to conform to the other's trajectory would be like a gesture of some diplomatic importance.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, that's cool. Cool. What I always wondered was, did anybody go back and collect the Botany Bay just for historical purposes?
I don't know.
Because Khan just lets it go, right?
Yeah, it's just floating away
because he doesn't need it anymore. But it's just sitting there, and they should have a pretty good idea of where it is.
Yeah.
if we could find the Titanic on the bottom of the ocean, they could find the Botany Bay floating around somewhere.
Yeah, I think somebody grabbed it and converted to some type of freighter.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it does feel like it's a museum piece at this point.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying. I mean, it's something from an important period in Earth's history, and as Mr. Spock points out, and several other people point out, it is a time with very spotty records.
Yeah.
So to find an artifact from that time period would be cool.
Well, whether it was intended or not, I'm sure it probably wasn't at the time, obviously, because these issues came up in later shows and movies. But I'll read this one. Craig Lubin says, two-dimensional thinking is just not a con problem in Star Trek. Well, that's a good point.
Yes.
As evidenced by the alignment of ships.
Yes. What I was about to say is that as far as being influential, Spacey did, of course, start a series of stories that, in true Roddenberry fashion, talks very much about prejudice and how it either evolves or devolves, only in a symbolic way. Through the terms, through the aspect of eugenics versus race or gender or what have you.
Right.
So, like I said, that continues, as we said.
Mm-hmm.
More to come.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up with it because of Spacey. We ended up having the character of Dahl,
right,
or specifically his background.
And let's think about that. A character created in 1966 ended up inspiring a character in
2020,
2021, 2022,
right.
something like that. So that's really
cool.
It's
remarkable, and it seems like only now are they, is the Federation starting to get a little less clenchy about augments,
right?
So yeah, I think it is interesting. Especially Kirk says, or Spock says, I wonder, Captain, if we come back in 100 years and see what is sprouted from the seed you planted here today.
Right.
Of course, at that time, apparently, the Federation had no second contact program in place, and it does feel like he's mad at Kirk, but it's like Kirk filed his report, and it's up for the Federation or Starfleet to be like, yeah, let's put a listening post. Like they could have put a listening post in orbit,
right?
And the idea that they couldn't, it is sort of somewhat amazing that when they pull into the SETI Alpha system, you think, even if it doesn't immediately ring bells, they'd be like, hey, there used to be 8 planets, now there are only 7. They're long range scans. There's no
Well, and let's think about that. There should be at least an asteroid belt of some sort, or something that planet exploded probably had a huge gravitational impact on that system. And where's the debris? It should still be there. It's not going anywhere.
And you think there would at least be a little warning, like, hey, in this system, we left a genetic Superman and all his buddies. So keep an eye out.
Yeah.
I mean, weren't they always leaving beacons behind to warn people away?
Yeah.
Yeah. And these are issues with the motion picture. Great film, highest grossing one of all of them, and second, first to, I guess, Star Trek 4, which then was the most liked after that. Very different kind of movie though. But yeah, there's some flaws in it. Well, we don't even need to get into the whole.
No. I'm just being.
Yeah, think about the Pavel Chekhov thing.
Yeah, well, that's also true because Chekhov shows up in
wasn't
season
even
2
on the show yet.
Yeah, it might be reasonable to assume that he was like a lower decker, and just wasn't on shift.
Well, I heard a joke a long time ago that he was a lower decker, and then when Khan was running around the ship, he definitely had to go to the men's room, and Pavel was occupying. He says, "I never forget a face."
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
You are a sloppy
it's when it's when he is fatigued again.
Yes.
And he leaves the dinner to go
Yeah.
to his quarters, and he just can't quite make it to the men's room.
Mm.
And then Pavel is hogging it. Yeah, that could be.
Are you finished yet? Others need to use the restroom.
Yeah. We'll call that a Townsville tidbit.
Yeah.
Okay, why not?
It's I think it definitely has it has had a far-reaching effect on Star Trek.
Right.
Is one of the few prejudices left for humanity are augments.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see them address that in season 2 of Prodigy. See if any of the crew members are going to treat him a little oddly because he's an augment,
right?
Or he's going to have to face prejudices like that.
Well, and let's go back to what Spock says to Kirk at some point. I think it's Kirk when he's saying, why was there no record of this? And Spock says, "Would you tell a war-weary world?"
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that it just almost destroyed itself. If you can say this, but almost destroyed itself. And would you admit to them that there were 70 or 80 Napoleons,
right,
being launched out into space?
Well, and he also indicated that Spock did that records are fragmentary from that era, which would have gone some distance to explain the time discrepancy. Although Picard season 2 seems to have reintroduced it, but
it's interesting. Oh, we're losing you, Chris. I can't hear you. I think you.
The reason I'm mentioning it is because of the prejudice.
Yes.
I mean that's where I'm coming at. Yeah, you're right, Joe. I mean, there's poor record keeping, but from that period, and you see that in First Contact.
Yeah.
So you basically see how effed up the world is.
Yeah.
After this war, again, there's another thing. I didn't even have that on my list, but I just thought of it.
Yeah.
When you see Zephyr Cochrane and his little gaggle of people he's living with, they're all living around a silo, and the world is a mess.
Yeah.
So
and that comes from this war.
Yeah.
I also have to wonder, and again, it goes to commenting on the human condition, and given the time frame we've established in new Star Trek for Paramount Plus. So we got the situation with Dahl, and then later, chronologically, we seem, it seems like we've left behind prejudice of augments to concentrate now on prejudice of synthetics. So I guess the question that brings to mind is, do we always have to have a target for our prejudices and bigotry?
No.
You would hope not, but humanity is flawed, if nothing else.
Well, as Khan says, how little has man changed?
Yes.
Yes, there's been technological advancement.
But
he's right. He is right that I don't really think man had changed that much. I mean, you see it a lot in Star Trek. Kirk often refers to the idea that we're basically still savages, and it's like your favorite line, Leo, where he says, "But I will choose not to kill today."
Yeah.
I might want to kill, but I'll choose not to do it today.
Yeah.
And that's why we're working towards being better people.
Yeah.
Well, there's something to be said for overcoming your nature versus quashing it.
Yes.
Right. And there's a Vulcan comment.
Yes.
Oh, well, I take that as high praise. Thank you, sir.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, so are the Vulcans quashing their nature, or are they overcoming it by holding on, by not having their emotions?
It's I kind of wonder how well Vulcan society would work in practice.
Well, I think we might be able to talk about that if we choose to discuss Amok Time.
Yes.
Which Amok Time is the first real introduction into Vulcan culture, I think.
I believe you're correct. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, where you see it.
Yes.
We see Spock's parents in
Journey to
Babel, and that
came later.
That came later.
Okay,
they're both are the interesting insights into Vulcan culture.
Right.
One in a broader sense, and one specifically, Spock's relationship with his parents. But that's for another episode before we start going down that.
Yeah, no. I'm just thinking
say a lot hole.
That may be a nice segue for us to go into what we're going to pick next week. But anyway, I know a mock time is on our list somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah.
It's interesting going back to Star Trek Into Darkness. I have to say, when I watched it, I was along for the ride. I was like, I was engaged, and afterwards, there's the stuff you're like, yeah, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But one of
that doesn't make a lick of sense.
But one of the ideas that I thought was kind of interesting was in this version, this Star Trek timeline, Divergent timeline. Kirk doesn't find the Botany Bay, but another Federation ship does.
Right.
And, Admiral Marcus, played by RoboCop, aka Peter Weller, decides to use Khan and his people as sort of like black ops operatives, sending them in.
I saw him referred to as Admiral RoboCop on
on
one website. Yeah.
One of in the long list of Badmirals in Starfleet history. But I remember reading maybe years before that film came out, the idea that they were going to do a Wrath of Khan, and the idea that Khan's people were sort of like these like deep cover black ops, agents. And I was like, oh, that seems kind of like a cool idea.
Right.
And they did that. I mean, and that in and of itself is kind of an interesting idea.
Right.
Because it's a way of it makes it's for a man out of time, like these genetic supermen. You're given you're basically good at combat and doing all this stuff. Although Khan, of course, chafes having to take orders from somebody he considers his inferior, but he has all these the rest of his crew in still in stasis, so he's he's bound to do it, which is.
And I understand that all except one or maybe all of his crew, that were men, were Chippendales dancers.
That's true. I was going to bring that up. That was with the exception of Joaquin, the blonde kid.
Yeah,
that's a kid who was on a show, the name of which I forget. It was in the 70s. He was it was sort of like a Starman sort of ripoff. Like he was sort of the space Jesus thing. It didn't even get a whole season. But the rest of those guys that they hired, all the men, were Chippendales dancers because they were big dudes.
And jack dudes, yeah. Now, the other thing is that's amazing, and I read an article several weeks ago, and I wished I could have found it, all about how they came about getting Ricardo Montalban and how he was honored to be in the part, and there's a whole bunch of different things. And I wish I could have found it because I wanted to have those notes and comments for tonight, but I couldn't find it again. But Craig, I got to say, Craig does say that all of the Sung family projects, artificial and augmented life experience some form of prejudice.
This is true. Data's experienced prejudices many times,
right?
Including Measure of the Man.
Yeah.
One of probably the best episode in the second season. That show is called The Phoenix, aka Space Jesus.
See, now Craig is, besides being our technical expert, he is an encyclopedia of 60s, 70s, and 80s television. So
obscure genre TV.
Oh yeah. He also says that Chekhov was there because he was the best screamer.
Yes, this is true.
And it is true that Chekhov really can.
He really knew how to scream. That's why they put him in the agony booth.
Yeah, and that's why he's in the agony booth, and why he worked so well having that bug crawl in his ear.
Yes. They put creatures in our ears. They just tell lies.
They put creatures in our bodies.
Our buddies. Yeah. Now, I will say that was always kind of a really creepy moment for me.
Oh, yeah. Very creepy.
That little bug crawling around. They were pretty well done, considering that they weren't CG and they were practical.
Yeah, I would say the practical effect, the effects for Star Trek 2 are still pretty good. Although I say when the creatures are crawling in their ears, you could tell it's like a model. Like the ears, the actual ear part is the least convincing part
Yes,
of it.
you're right. You're right. It's a giant model of an ear.
But
Well, it's definitely an example where compelling storytelling is overcoming, some occasional iffy practical.
yeah,
effects.
I mean, listen, again, it's not like it takes me out of it. I'm just,
Right.
sometimes I'm looking, I'm like, yeah, I was watching a little bit of it last night, and I'm like, yeah, that ear still looks fake, but
Yeah.
up along, the rest of it is fine.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure why, when Chekhov realizes where they are, that they're in the Botany Bay and where they are, why they don't just beam out of there.
that's a good question. It's a good question.
Because
Probably because it's not.
They're
as
not
interesting
even
a
out in
story.
the storm, which they beamed into the sandstorm.
Yeah.
So that they can beam into it, they should be able to beam out of it. But let's say that could have been, that's giving us a problem. But they were inside the compartments, which were.
If they just said, tried to use the communicator, you're like, the signal's blocked, because of the,
Right.
But signals are blocked for dramatic purposes more than anything else.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we often wouldn't have a story if we didn't have malfunctioning technology.
Somebody posted a terrible thing that says the alternate ending to the Doomsday Machine, and it's Kirk sitting there going, gentlemen, I suggest you beam me aboard. And then they just recut the scene where Kyle's there saying, where the transporter makes its puff of smoke, and he goes, oh, it's whatever he says, it's shorted out again. And then Kirk just gets blown up by the.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I was watching that the other day because I was like, an alternate. I get suckered by all this clickbait.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, maybe there was something that they. Because there was a deleted scene, which I was hoping to get for this episode tonight, and I didn't, with McCoy talking to Khan in that scene where they have them all in the conference room. Right. There actually is a cut moment.
I saw that recently.
Yeah, where he's saying to him, you can't expect people to blah, 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 blah. He's giving him some McCoy,
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. Well,
I think that I would say that it has a far-reaching effect. We've touched on all of them. If we've missed any, please, send us a message or make a comment on the Facebook page or YouTube or what have you.
Please, anyone that's watching that couldn't be here tonight or is a little shy and doesn't feel like joining in with all our casual friends that drop in every week.
Again, very influential, and as we've said, more to come. This is a big topic that isn't exhausted yet.
Yeah. Oh no, that's what's neat about it, and it's great that not only were the episodes, the 3 seasons of episodes influenced as a whole influenced everything, but that some of them really caught and captured the imagination of writers and producers down the road. And then we saw other interesting stories based on these original 3 seasons of concepts. So I think we're about done with this one, though. Do you think, gentlemen, anything else you need to say?
No,
I think we covered it very well. And like I say, to be continued. And I look forward to discussing more influential episodes of the original series.
Right. Oh, let's see. Craig Lubin has one more comment here. Let me get this up here. Lesson from Khan: don't stick your face in a radiation-heavy antimatter heated plasma stream.
Some of the...
it tends to give you a pretty bad skin condition.
Yeah. That's.
But makes a great Christmas ornament.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I've got my little lieutenant here, and I think we're ready to roll out of here. Thank you all. Thank you for watching. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Live long and prosper. And we will see you next week at the same time.
Yes.
And I don't know. We'll see. I'll post something by the weekend as to which episode we're going to look at. I have a feeling I know, but I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to speak.
We have a strong contender there, but
yes, exactly. All right, guys.
All right.
Have a wonderful week. And where's my mouse? There it goes. And we'll see you all next week on Trek Show. You popped me in the nose. Oh, we're not out yet. Oh no.